Hey, I'm Marco. I'm a former opera singer turned voice actor. Today, we're going to be talking about Snow and Summer from NieR, Gestalt, and Replicant. I have to tell you, the first time I listened to this was right before NieR Replicant had come out. I'd never listened to the soundtrack of NieR Gestalt, and I didn't really know about NieR Gestalt. And when I listened to it, I was just like kind of hanging out. I was like, wow, that's a cool song. And then everything flipped and the drums came in, and it was just like, oh my God, this song is amazing. So, yeah, I'm excited to listen to this one with you, and this is the continuation of the NieR series. There's a playlist somewhere here. I'm going through some of the best songs, in my opinion, of the NieR OSTs, and yeah, I hope you enjoy those too. So let's just dive right in. Really quickly, I think that what's interesting about this is that this is the first piece in the OST. It's the first piece in the soundtrack. This setup is quite affecting. First of all, the use of the boy choir is a very genius move because children's choirs affect us as listeners much differently than adult choirs, female choirs, or male choirs. Each sound brings its own emotions to the piece. Whether it's a men's chorus, which is usually dominant, virile, strong, masculine, whatever, or you've got a female chorus, which can be ethereal, earthy, heavenly, like the voice of God, like I mentioned in another video. But the children's chorus is interesting because there's only a few other songs that have children's chorus or child soloists in this OST. I think the whole point is about innocence. When we hear these dissonant steps, that tends to be really a sense of foreboding, a sense of fear, a sense of dread, a sense of worry. And in this, I think it's a sense of loss and a sense of, to me, it sounds like a loss of innocence. And what's cool about this is that this first section is just children's choir. There's something about a cappella straight tone singing that is very effective in transporting us into a situation, we're used to hearing instrumentation underneath singing. And so when there is no instrumentation and there's just this 4-part voice leading, it elicits a different sort of reaction to us as a listener. There's a desperation in the sound. There's a rawness. And what's interesting too is that this is very Baroque sounding. Quite a few of these songs sound like they could be written in the Baroque time period. Now, of course, the voice leading is not standard Baroque approach. It sort of carries us to a different time. And I think that's really interesting. Also, isn't that an interesting little thing too? Shiko. Not only because there's an E vowel on the shiko, which automatically the E vowel, where it's placed in the mouth, because if you look at the mouth structure, if you look at a vowel chart, the E is at the roof of the hard palate, which is the hard part of your mouth right here. E, there's automatically a little bit more pointedness to the E vowel. And then what's also cool is that the way that we are going down this scale and dipping into these half steps, when we lean into the dissonance, that was something I was always taught in school. When you lean into dissonance, it creates more tension, which then heightens the drama. And that's then for a 4-note thing. Really, it's 2 notes because it's the note before and then the step. And that elicits because imagine if it was just like Barashiko. It would still, the half step still elicits a response from you, but it's much more interesting, and they do it in this recording. When the step down, there's an emphasis. Yeah. That's cool too. Listen to another voice if you've been listening to one voice. Listen to the lower voices. Isn't that interesting too? The orchestra comes in and we hear this drum, and this drum is propelling us forward. It's marching us forward into the unknown, into whatever's to come next. And there's this bum 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 bum. There's this sense of, it's almost like a heartbeat. It feels like, oh, something is about to happen. I need to, I don't know. In this instance, obviously, in NieR Replicant, I understand that it's like I need to save my sister. But if we're listening to this outside of the music, that there is this sense of like a pulse, a beat, the sense of stress among us. And then the orchestra comes in, and now obviously the first section has no orchestra, the second section has orchestra, and then we'll hear in the third section there is only orchestra. And the orchestra is actually doubling the voice, and so what I think it's actually doing is elevating the stress and the despair and the desperation, which is then allowing us as a listener to like be transported into, oh my God, this is like a very big deal. What's happening? It heightens our stress, and it heightens our desire to continue to listen, to see if there is a resolution, which is ultimately what all of us as listeners want, is to resolve a conflict, to resolve the music, to resolve the stress and the drama. You hear it's exactly the same as the child chorus. I think the added instrumentation there and the added sound effects there really works to make it feel like it was some kind of awful dream that a person starts to wake up to. I hear the tone, and me personally, I don't view that as like loss necessarily. I view that as like perhaps respite or a sense of resolution or a sense of shift from the drama that has occurred throughout the entire piece. I mean, if you look at the arc of the piece, to me, it's like something fearful is happening. There is some sort of battle. Then there is a conflict where perhaps the main character is losing, and then everything comes together and the character takes over and is able to sustain. And then there's a quiet resolution with this sort of, this sound effect. Granted, I know the beginning of NieR Replicants. I know the first scene. So I also understand that that's sort of what comes to follow. But there is, if we remove ourselves from the game, which is what I always intend to do when I listen to these tracks with you, if you're in a symphony hall and you hear this, what do you think? What do you imagine is happening? And so much of the tone of these pieces is to elicit an emotional response. Yes, it's tied to the game intrinsically, but there are plenty of pieces in classical music, specifically Berlioz and Strauss, Richard Strauss, that are specifically created. They're called tone poems, if I remember. And they're specifically made for us to imagine a whole scena, a whole scene that's occurring in our mind's eye. And it can be anything you want it to be. There's no right answer. And in this case, we have the benefit of knowing the story, knowing what's happening in the scene. But if we remove ourselves from the game, I mean, it's quite affecting. And it really does feel like there is a desperate battle happening. There is great loss. There is fear. There is worry. There is concern. And then this ending is just like this sort of very quiet, confusing conclusion that we don't know what it means, if it's a good conclusion, a bad conclusion, but it's sort of an amorphous conclusion, which I find very interesting. If you were in a symphony hall and you heard this, it's funny because I actually think that what's beautiful about this particular soundtrack is that there are a lot of callbacks to classical and Baroque music, using the voice leading that's using harmony, using straight tone, using a children's chorus. These were popular things to do in Bach's time. Now, I don't think the dissonance was quite as sharp in his time period. However, I do think that if you program this in a concert or in a recital or something, or in a symphonic performance, no one would really know that it's from a game necessarily. They'd be like, whoa, this is like a new take on, they would call it neo-Baroque or neo-classical. There are so many composers that are trying to write music for the symphonic space and for the operatic space that forget that so much of what we love is when music assists us in telling a story, which is why games are in a really interesting position and why game music is in a very interesting position, because it is theoretically the compositional place to be. That in movies, of course. It is the compositional place to be when it comes to producing compositions that harken back to romantic time period, Puccini, Verdi, these styles of music, Wagner, obviously Bach, Handel. I often complained about this when I was a singer because sometimes composers that are modern, I don't know if honestly, I can't speak to it, but perhaps maybe there's too much schooling or folks don't understand necessarily how to write a melody. And I find it interesting that video game music has positioned itself to be the place where if you want a melody, it's all in video games. And I just find that intriguing. This soundtrack is incredible. And it's kind of interesting to witness what I would consider neo-Baroque, or like taking Baroque tropes or taking classical tropes and turning them into something that is modern and fresh, but still has and harkens back to what came 200 years ago. Anyway, that's my take on that. I love it. I remember listening to this and I was just completely blown away by it. So thank you, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye.